Wyoming Territory, November 1884. Snow whipped sideways across the prairie, thick enough to erase the moon. Nathaniel Cooper had just finished tossing the last of the firewood into the bin when he heard the knock barely there, like someone too cold to knock harder. He opened the door and blinked into the storm. A girl stood there, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, snow clinging to her boots and skirts. Her belly was too round to be anything but a few weeks from birth. Her lips were blue, her hands trembled. "Come inside," Nathaniel said, stepping aside. "You are not meant to sleep in the cold." She hesitated. Her eyes darted past him, scanning the cabin's shadowed interior. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, softer now. "You can sit down, rest your feet. There's coffee on the stove." After a beat, she stepped in. Nathaniel closed the door behind her and latched it. The girl stood near the hearth, not quite sure what to do. Her dress was soaked to the knees. Her cheeks were hollowed, not from the cold hunger had done that. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked, moving to the stove. He poured hot coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Beatrice," she said, her voice dry and quiet. "Beatrice Orlin," he nodded. "Nathaniel Cooper, this is my place." She took the coffee with careful hands and sat on the edge of the chair closest to the fire. He handed her a folded quilt from the back of the couch. "Where were you headed?" he asked, not pressing, just asking as he stoked the fire. Beatrice looked down into the cup. "Nowhere in particular, just away." Nathaniel watched her for a moment, the way her shoulders curled forward. How she drank the coffee like it hurt to swallow. "You are due soon," he said. She nodded. "A few weeks, maybe less." There was silence then, except for the pop of the fire. He went to the cupboard, pulled out bread and a jar of late summer peaches. He set them in front of her without a word and gave her space to eat. She looked up after a few bites. "Why are you being kind?" Nathaniel sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "Because someone should have been kind to you a long time ago." She did not answer. Her eyes dropped again. But she kept eating. By the time she finished, her hands had stopped shaking. He showed her to the spare room, the one with the old patchwork quilt his mother had made before typhoid took her and his father both. It smelled of cedar and dust. "You can sleep here," he said. "The door locks from the inside." Beatrice looked at him. "Thank you." He nodded once, then left her to rest. The next morning the storm had passed. Snow lay thick across the land, but the wind was gone. Nathaniel was outside splitting wood when he heard the door creak. Beatrice stepped out, wrapped in one of his coats. It swallowed her, but it was warm. "You should be resting," he said, wiping his brow. "I can help. I have done chores before." He looked at her, at the small defiance in her voice. "You are not a guest here, Beatrice. You are safe. That means you do not have to earn your place." She looked away, brushing hair from her face. "I do not know how to be safe." Nathaniel lowered the axe. "Then I will teach you." She looked at him, something in her eyes softening. Then she nodded. Days passed, quiet and slow. Beatrice stayed. She did not talk much, but she moved with more ease now. Her color returned. She laughed once, just once, when Nathaniel dropped a pan of flour and made a fool of himself trying to clean it up. He never pushed her for the past. He could tell she was still carrying it like a heavy stone beneath her ribs. One evening she asked, "Do you live out here alone?" Nathaniel nodded. "Since I was 19. How old are you now?" 28. She looked surprised. "You seem older." "I have seen some things." "I believe that," she said, quiet again. He looked at her. "What about you?" Beatrice's hands were folded in her lap. "I am 22. I left Georgia last spring. I thought I would find work in Cheyenne, but I got turned around, ended up further west. I was with someone, for a bit, but he left when he found out about the baby." Nathaniel did not say anything, just waited. "I have no one," she said, her voice small but sure. "You have me," he said, and he meant it. She looked up at him like she wanted to believe that. That night she cried behind her door, quiet cries like she did not want to be heard. Nathaniel stood outside for a minute, hand against the wood, but he did not knock. He just stood there, letting her know she was not alone. A week passed. Then, too, the snow melted a little. The creek started to run again. Beatrice moved more slowly now. Her back ached. Nathaniel helped when she let him, carrying water, lifting baskets, chopping vegetables. One morning she was kneading dough when she paused, a hand on her belly, eyes wide. "What is it?" Nathaniel asked, stepping forward. She smiled, really smiled. He kicked. Nathaniel grinned. That is a strong one. She said again, like she already knew. Nathaniel stepped closer, leaned down. Mind if I? She nodded. He placed his hand gently on the side of her belly. A moment passed, then another, then there it was a tiny thump beneath his palm. His breath caught. Beatrice was watching him. No one has ever wanted to feel it before. I do, he said and looked up at her. I really do. Her eyes held his for longer this time. That night they sat in front of the fire. She leaned against the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket. He sat beside her, not touching, just near. I was scared to knock on your door, she said. I am glad you did. She turned her head. Why are you so kind to me? He looked at her, really looked. Because you are strong, and you are brave, and you deserve someone to see that. She blinked, eyes wet. You are the first person who ever said that to me. He reached for her hand, slow, waiting. She let him take it. And that was how they sat, hand in hand, fire casting soft light across their faces. Neither of them said it, but it was starting. Already, something real, something steady, something that had been waiting for them both. The wind had softened. Afternoon light slanted through the cottonwoods beyond the pasture, gold and low. Beatrice stood at the barn's open door, one hand resting on the lintel, the other wrapped around her middle. Nathaniel was inside, brushing down the mare. He didn't speak at first, just kept rhythm with the curry comb, like he knew she needed a moment. I used to think I'd end up in a place like this, she said finally, her voice steady but quieter than usual. Not exactly here, but somewhere with quiet mornings, a garden. A porch with a chair that don't wobble. Nathaniel didn't look up. He didn't have to. You still could. She stepped inside, walked slow and careful past the feed bins. I thought maybe you'd want to sell that old rocker out front. The leg's loose, but I could fix it. You want to mend it, you're welcome to, but I'd rather you keep it. Her brow furrowed. Why? He led the mare back into her stall, latched the gate. Because I built it. And I'd like to see someone sit there who might enjoy it more than I did. She didn't answer right away. The air smelled of hay and horses and something warmer, the faint trace of saddle soap on his hands. He set the brush back on the shelf and turned toward her. You ever work with wood? He asked. A little. My uncle taught me to carve when I was small. He made toys for the church children every December. Nathaniel nodded. I've got some scrap pine in the shed. Could teach you how to shape a handle if your hands don't mind the work. She looked down at them. They've taken worse. They walked back to the house in silence. The snow had crusted over, slick underfoot. Beatrice moved slowly, her palm brushing the porch rail as she climbed the steps. Inside, she paused near the hearth. That woman in the photograph on the shelf, she said. She your sister? Nathaniel looked up from the kettle. No, my mother. She looked kind. I see it in her eyes. She was. She taught me how to sew a patch so it'd hold through a season. Said if you stitch something with care, it lasts even when it's been worn thin. Beatrice eased down into the rocker. It creaked under her, but gently. I like that. He poured her a cup of warm water with mint leaves and handed it over. She took it with a nod, fingers curling around the tin mug. You always been good at being alone? She asked. Better at it than I wanted to be, he said. Then after a pause, but I don't think it's how I want the rest of my life to go. She looked over at him. You ever think about leaving? Going east maybe, where there's people and trains and noise. I left once. Didn't find anything worth staying for. Came back and built this place with my own hands. I'd rather live where I can hear the wind than the rail yards. Beatrice sipped the tea. I never planned on Wyoming. Just kept walking till the road got too cold to keep going. Nathaniel crouched beside the hearth, pushed a few small logs into the embers. You don't have to keep going anymore. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened as she watched the flames. Her hand rested on her belly again. The baby shifted and her breath caught. You ever held a child? She asked. He nodded. Once, neighbor's boy got lost in the woods when he was 5. I found him curled up under a pine tree, carried him back. He kept his arms around my neck the whole way. Were you scared? Not for myself, he said. Just for him. Beatrice leaned her head against the high back of the chair, the light from the fire warming the curve of her cheek. I think I'd like to stay through the birth. If that's all right, it is. And after Nathaniel sat beside her on the floor, his back against the wall, he didn't answer right away. The fire crackled and outside the last geese of the season called southward. After, he said, "You can stay as long as you want." "I'd like that." Her eyes met his. They didn't hold anything back this time. "I think I'd like that too." The early spring sun filtered through the cabin's single window, pale and thin but warm enough to coax sap from the trees. Beatrice sat in the quiet at the kitchen table, her sewing basket open, fingers working a hem on one of the blankets she planned to wrap the baby in. Her needle moved with care, every stitch even. Nathaniel was outside repairing the corral fence. She could hear the regular knock of the hammer, the occasional murmur to the horse he'd tied nearby. She looked up when the door creaked open. Nathaniel stepped in, boots dusted with thawed mud, hat in hand. Post rider came through. "Brought a parcel, addressed to you." She pulled the letter into her lap. The handwriting was familiar, careful, slanted. She didn't open it right away. Nathaniel poured water into the basin and scrubbed his hands, then dried them on his trousers. "You don't have to read it if it'll stir something best left quiet," he said. She nodded, but her thumb was already under the fold, breaking the seal. Her eyes moved across the page, lips parting as she read. When she finished, she laid it flat on the table, staring down at it without speaking. "Beatrice, it's from my cousin in Macon. She heard I was gone, says my father's ill, wants me to come back." Her voice held no tremble, only distance. Nathaniel shifted his weight. "Do you want to go?" She traced a crack in the tabletop with her nail. "He put me out the day he learned. Said I'd shamed the family." Her voice hollowed. "I walked to the station with nothing but a satchel and $1. He never looked back." Nathaniel stepped closer, leaning his hip against the edge of the table. "That doesn't sound like a man who's earned your return. I don't think he wants it. I think she's asking because he's dying and she's scared to be alone." Beatrice raised her chin. "But I'm not a girl to be summoned." He searched her face. "What would you do if you weren't trying to answer them?" "I'd stay here, grow roots. Let this child be born into a place that doesn't flinch when it looks at us." Nathaniel nodded once. "Then stay." She looked toward the window where the light had shifted against the floorboards. "I've never been offered that before, staying. I'm not offering it like charity," he said. "I want you here, you and the child." Beatrice folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. "Then I'll burn this. No use keeping what doesn't serve." That evening, Nathaniel built the fire high. She knelt beside it with the letter in hand and held it over the flame. It curled and blackened, the ink vanishing into smoke. The baby kicked again, stronger now, and she pressed a hand to her side, steadying herself against the hearth. Nathaniel stepped forward. "You all right?" She nodded. "He's restless. I think he'll be a walker like me." "You won't be walking alone anymore," he said quietly. Later, she sat on the porch with her feet up, watching the sky stretch open with stars. Nathaniel brought a wooden bowl of warm milk and honey, set it beside her. "You always make things easier without saying much," she said. He took the chair beside hers. "Words don't carry weight unless they're earned." She looked at him, really looked. "What are you hoping for?" He didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the grass in slow waves. Then he said, "A family, one that chooses each other, one that stays." She took a long breath. "You ask for something I didn't think I could give. Do you want to?" "I do." Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then we'll build it together." Beatrice reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation, no promise needed saying. It was already made. The child came on a cold morning just before the last frost broke. Beatrice woke with a low sound in her throat, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the bed frame. Nathaniel heard her from the main room and was through the door before she called his name. "It's starting," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. He nodded once and stoked the fire higher. The kettle had already been set the night before, and the clean linens folded on the trunk beside her bed were laid out now without a word. He didn't pace. He didn't flinch. He moved in quiet rhythm, just as he had with the fields and the fence posts and every other piece of their life. They'd written to the midwife in Laramie weeks ago, but the woman hadn't arrived and the sky outside showed no sign of a rider. Beatrice's breathing deepened. She didn't ask where the help was. She only said, "You'll have to stay with me." "I'm not leaving this room," Nathaniel said. By midday, her hands had gone white from gripping the mattress. She didn't cry out, didn't beg. Nathaniel knelt beside her, wiping her brow with a damp cloth and murmuring what little he could. He'd never seen anyone fight like that, not with fists, but with breath, with staying. Just after the hour turned, the child came a boy with a full head of dark hair and lungs that filled the room. Beatrice sank back against the pillows, eyes wide with disbelief, then wonder. Nathaniel wrapped the boy in the blanket she'd sewn and placed him in her arms. "He's heavier than I thought," she whispered. "He's strong," Nathaniel said, voice rough. She looked up at him, flushed and damp and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness. "He's ours." Nathaniel sat beside her, one hand on the small of her back. "He is," the boy quieted, eyes shut tight, mouth working against the edge of the blanket. Beatrice touched his cheek with 2 fingers as if still unsure he was real. "What will you call him?" Nathaniel asked. She looked down, then out the window where the sun was breaking through the clouds. "Ellis. After the river I crossed when I left Georgia. It was the first place I felt free," Nathaniel nodded. "Ellis Cooper," he said aloud, and the boy stirred at the sound. Beatrice leaned her head against Nathaniel's shoulder. "You'll teach him things I won't know. About horses and woodwork and how to be steady. And you'll teach him things I can't," he said. For a long while they stayed like that, Ellis sleeping in the crook of her arm, Nathaniel's hand resting over hers. Later, Nathaniel stepped outside to cut more wood. The air smelled of thaw and pine. He split each log down clean, and even the rhythm easing the weight in his chest. Beatrice appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, Ellis cradled to her chest. "You're not supposed to be up yet," Nathaniel said, setting down the axe. "I'm not far," she replied, letting the wind catch a strand of her hair. He wanted to see sunlight. Nathaniel crossed the yard. She didn't step back when he reached for the baby. Ellis shifted in his sleep as Nathaniel took him, holding him with the awe of a man who'd never thought to carry something so small. "I've never had something I feared losing more than this," Nathaniel said. "You won't lose him," Beatrice answered. "Or me." He looked up. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." They stood close, her hand on his arm, his around their son. The wind moved through the grass with the hush of something old and steady. Behind them, the house waited, quiet, warm, lived in. "Come inside," Nathaniel said, his voice low and full of something heavier than winter. "You're not meant to stand in the cold." Beatrice smiled, tired and full. "I think I'll stay in this time." She stepped past him into the doorway, and he followed her in. The door shut behind them, and the world outside softened into spring. The garden broke open by late April, modest rows of kale and turnips pushing up through the thawed earth. Nathaniel had widened the plot by 6 feet, and Beatrice walked its border each morning with Ellis bound close against her chest, pointing out the green shoots as they surfaced. She'd begun to hum again, mostly when she thought no one was listening. Nathaniel built her a stool from pine he'd planed smooth, setting it near the plot so she could rest when her hips ached. She sat there now, son on her shoulders, Ellis asleep in a woven cradle beside her. He'd made that too, lashing it by hand from willow branches and lining it with the soft muslin she'd hemmed in the quiet hours between feedings. "You ever think about putting up a sign?" she asked, brushing soil from her palms as Nathaniel approached with a pail of water. He tilted his head. "A sign for what?" "For your carpentry. You've got a hand for it. Could take orders from the town, maybe trade for what we can't grow." He considered that, setting the pail down beside her stool. "I never thought of it as something worth selling." She looked up at him. "It is," he nodded slowly. "If I do, it'll be under both our names." She let that settle a moment. "Then it's settled." The wind carried the scent of wet pine and the distant sweetness of sage. Nathaniel crouched near the cradle and ran a finger along Ellis's tiny hand. The baby stirred, then settled again into sleep. "There's a woman in town," Beatrice said, "Mrs. Hammond. She runs the school, says she's losing her sight, needs someone to help read the letters that come in." Nathaniel looked up. "You thinking about going?" She offered me $3 a month and a sack of flour. Said she'd never seen anyone read that fast. He smiled faintly. "That's because you take in words like you're thirsty." "I was for a long time." He reached for her hand, tugged it gently until she stood. "If you want it, take it." "I'll mind Ellis." "You." "I raised calves in worse shape than him," he said. And I've seen how you hold him. It's not the arms that matter, it's what's behind them. She studied his face. You'd be all right here with him? I'd be better than all right. That evening they walked the pasture while the sheep grazed low and lazy. She carried Ellis against her chest, and Nathaniel kept his hand at the small of her back. The air had turned warm enough that the collars of their shirts stayed open, and the frogs had returned to the creek. He's going to ask questions one day, she said. About where he came from. Nathaniel watched a hawk spiral high over the ridge. We'll answer him. You won't mind, her voice had grown quieter. I won't mind anything he asks, long as he knows he's loved, long as he knows he's ours. She stopped walking, turned to face him. There's nothing I want more than to build that with you. Not just the home or the garden or the cradle, but the years. I want all of them. He stepped closer. You have them, every one. She pressed her hand to his chest. Then marry me, he blinked once. You're asking me? I am. Nathaniel's mouth curved slowly. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the edge of her hairline. I'd have asked, but I wasn't sure I'd earned it yet. You earned it the day you opened that door, she whispered. He kissed her long and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't need an audience or a reason. When they broke apart, Ellis stirred but didn't cry. Nathaniel rested his forehead to hers. We'll tell him the truth, he said. That his mother is the bravest woman I've ever known, and that his father is the kindest man west of the Mississippi. They stood there until the light faded, the three of them wrapped in the hush of coming night. They married the following week, on the first Sunday of May. Reverend Talbot rode in from Rock Creek, and they stood beneath the cottonwood that shaded the western fence line. She wore a dress the widow Pelham had outgrown and hemmed down, and Nathaniel wore his father's coat, the sleeves still too short by an inch. There were no guests, but the land and the wind and the child cradled between them. I do, Beatrice said, her voice unwavering. I do, Nathaniel answered, his eyes never leaving hers. When the Reverend left, Beatrice took Nathaniel's hand and walked with him back to the house they had built into something more than shelter. Inside, the fire crackled low, the cradle rocked gently, and the world felt quiet in a way that meant fullness, not absence. Nathaniel poured 2 cups of hot cider and sat beside her at the table. Tomorrow, she said, I think I'll plant sweet peas by the porch. He smiled. I'll dig the holes. Then we'll fill them together. The candlelight flickered against the walls, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and firewood. Outside, the land stretched open and waiting green with new life, steady beneath their feet. And inside, they leaned toward each other, bound not by rescue or need, but by choice. By the life they had shaped from the ashes of what had been and the promise of all that still lay ahead.